Okay, we're back for another 10-minute talk, and this time we're going to talk about supplements because I've had a fair few questions about supplements recently. There's been um, some new research coming out, but also some new products that are probably more driving the interest. Um, so I just want to talk about supplements generally. So I kind of see it in two ways. You've got your supplements to support healthy diet, and then your performance related supplements. So um, there is a fair amount of subjectivity to all this, and some coaches will kind of say different things or have a different slant in it. So my view on it is very much as I'm working with amateur athletes. Um, we're looking to improve, but we're not working in the fine margins that the pros are. And so I just want you to kind of bear that in mind when you hear what I'm going to be talking about, because I think it's very easy to kind of get dragged into that stuff and allow it to take up too much of your time, tension, and money, when actually there are other things that could really use those resources, and are going to give you way bigger benefits than supplements. That's not to say that I'm not against supplements, by the way. I'm actually pretty open-minded about it, but the vast majority of supplements, I would suggest, are heavily steeped um, in marketing, rather than kind of be underpinned by extremely strong science. Anyway, right. So let's just go into it. So, generally speaking, when we're talking about your diet, your normal kind of like healthy kind of living, a balanced diet that covers your macronutrients, that covers your calorie requirements as an athlete, not as an endurance athlete. Um, if you're doing that, you shouldn't really need much in the way of supplementation. Okay, the only kind of exceptions to that are if you're diagnosed with a specific deficiency. And we always really recommend our athletes take sort of semi-regular blood tests just so you can kind of keep on top of that. Because that kind of thing can actually kind of sneak up on you, um, particularly as you get older. So yeah, take regular blood tests if you think that actually you might be deficient in something. Um, because I hate saying this because I just watched a TikTok actually that kind of was taking the piss out of somebody for saying this sort of thing. But sleep, eating, and de-stressing can cure a lot of stuff. Um, uh, so I would start looking at that sort of thing. Have you got all that in check? But yeah, if you don't have a diagnosed deficiency, probably not going to need a supplement for that supposed deficiency. Caveat being, for the Northern Hemisphere, vitamin D in the winter, we are all very vitamin D deficient for most of the year. And arguably, actually, even at this time of the year, so we're going through a heat wave at the moment, arguably we might even be vitamin deficient at this time because we're hiding indoors away from sort of the 30 plus degrees heat. And one that isn't kind of in that little list is iron. Arguably, that would be a diagnosed deficiency. But if you are a female athlete with a particularly heavy period, then yeah, you might want to kind of think about that one, and perhaps talk to your doctor if you're consistently low on energy levels. Then yeah, get a blood test, speak to a doctor. But yeah, vitamin D and iron are the only kind of two kind of common deficiencies in kind of my non-medical opinion. So that kind of takes us to performance supplements, and that more shifts away from supplements that you need. They're kind of more supplements that you want, or supplements you think might kind of just improve your recovery or your training. And for me, there's not many in that list either. I think again, if you're covering your calorie requirements, you've got a balanced diet, should be able to manage your nutrition with that. So for me though, I don't recommend, but I do kind of see the practicalities of a protein supplement. I personally find it quite difficult to meet my protein requirements without supplementation, but that's more because not because I'm a fussy eater. I just struggle to eat kind of big meals. So, and always have, particularly in the mornings. So generally speaking, for an endurance athlete, like an Ironman or something like that, you're looking for about 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. And if you do that sum, it's actually a fair amount of protein. Okay, so what we quite often see, particularly new athletes, is one, they quite often aren't meeting their calorie requirements full stop. And I think there's a lot of misleading information about the amount of calories that an athlete who's training sort of 9, 10, 12 hours a day. You are not the general population if you're doing that type of volume. You really need to take your meeting your calorie requirements and your protein requirements seriously. Another thing is making sure that you get at least 20 grams of protein into your system immediately after exercise. And that for me is kind of the main argument for protein supplementation is getting that protein in quickly. It can be quite difficult if you're eating sort of Greek yogurt and things like that, because I personally find it quite hard to eat after intense exercise. So again, a protein shake, it can be quite a quick and a good way. Just make sure you use a reputable brand and check the ingredients, because quite often you get things like amino what's the expression, amino dosing, where basically there's amino acids and they use, rather than kind of a complete protein in there, they dump amino acids in it, which are the building blocks of protein anyway, but it does slow kind of the absorption and kind of the muscle protein synthesis as a result. So for men, we have an hour's window where we have an elevated muscle protein synthesis response. For women, it's a fair bit shorter, about half an hour. So that high protein meal straight after exercise is one you got to be kind of smart about and sharp on. Ingesting carbs at the same time is also really sensible for recovery purposes for an endurance athlete, particularly if you're training same day, or if you're training in the evening and then going to be training again in the morning the next day. You really want to get that muscle and liver glycogen stocked up again, so that you have fuel to burn for the next session, basically. And then the only other supplement, and this is probably one that I probably do recommend actually, and you probably would have seen a lot on social media at the moment, around creatine. For me, I think it's a great one for endurance athletes, particularly if you're supplementing. I should say supporting rather than supplementing. As long as if you're supporting your endurance training, your triathlon, your cycling training, whatever it is, with strength training, really recommend taking creatine. You might see something about a loading phase where for like a week or so you take quite a high dose of creatine, something like 20 grams a day or something, and that's to kind of stock up your system with creatine. I would think carefully about doing that loading phase. I and some of our athletes have found that we get stomach issues with taking on that amount of creatine in one go. You can nuance it. You can take less in that loading phase. Generally speaking, I would just suggest taking the typical 5 to 6 grams per day. Now, creatine is fantastic because basically creatine is used in your phosphocreatine energy system. It's all about explosive energy production, so sprints, lifting weights, anaerobic stuff basically. And even for the most endurance athletes, you are still using that energy system. So making sure it's stocked up with the fuel it needs. It can really help make a tough session feel that little bit easier, or perhaps just you feel like you have more in you to give. The other thing about creatine is there's a fair bit of research recently to kind of support the cognitive benefits of creatine. Your brain uses creatine, so yeah, it's probably the one sort of sports supplement that I would relatively highly recommend. But even with all this stuff, guys, there are other sources rather than taking creatine monohydrate. It just means there's extra calories involved with that consumption of creatine through meat products and things like that. So yeah, hopefully that is helpful. That's my general take on it. But just start if you're thinking about supplementation and you've seen something new and fancy. There's a couple of things I really recommend. Firstly, if you can, try and get hold of the research that is kind of proposing that supplement. Um, it can be hard to get the research, but I really recommend it. And before you start putting something into your body that you don't really know what it is, because there's a lot of dodgy research out there. You know, if the research, if the body, the data set is sort of like 15 people, you know, that's not a very big data set. You know, if you're looking at data sets, you want it to be thousands and thousands of people to support findings. But also just think about, you know, maybe think about who's paying for that research. You know, think about kind of where the product is coming from. Um, yeah, just be a little bit analytical and critical about a lot of these supplements because you know, at best it could be a waste of your money. At worst, it could be a little bit detrimental because a lot of the time supplements, even if they do have supporting research takes years to kind of um, interrogate and peer review, etc. So if something's very new, I wouldn't be too quick to jump on the bandwagon. Anyway, there you go.